Welcome to the Weekly Leadership Experience, a place for leaders to get inspired, be challenged, and grow. I am your host, Rashad Oberlander. Let's get started. Today's episode of the Weekly Leadership Experience is brought to you by my 7-day Leadership Growth Challenge. It's a free challenge that I've created, and it's delivered by email over the course of 7 days. I've created 7 compelling questions to challenge various aspects of your leadership, the way you lead, and why you lead. Go to rashadoberlander.com and scroll down until you find the 7-day leadership challenge, or look for the link in the show notes. And now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Weekly Leadership Experience. Today I am joined by Christopher Mifsud, all the way from the town of Eindhoven in the Netherlands. Chris is the founder of Press Start Leadership, providing game-changing leadership, coaching, and training for the video game industry. Chris is a seasoned veteran himself of this arena and has held a number of senior positions from Montreal, Quebec to Mumbai, India. Chris, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you. I think it's an interesting little niche you've got for yourself here in the video game industry. And you're kind of the I've been everywhere man. What's the story here?
I started off at a young age loving video games, and it led to a career in it, which is great. My first job in video games was working with some friends. We had been doing tabletop role-playing game for a long time together, and they knew what I was doing originally in the movie industry, and somehow that kind of led into working in the video game industry, leading teams. And from there I kind of jumped from one location to another. So it started off in Cary, North Carolina, moved its way to Las Vegas, Nevada, then Quebec, Canada, then Mumbai, India, then Malta, then Krakow, Poland, and now I'm in Eindhoven in the Netherlands. So yeah, it's been a crazy journey around the world, but a lot of fun, and pretty much doing the same thing across the board, always leading teams in a creative manner and doing great jobs of creating self-motivated teams that really love what they're doing and are passionate about it and create great products. So yeah,
very cool. Yeah, and you've been very fortunate, I guess, to see a lot of different cultures in different parts of the world.
Yeah, no, that's been a big part of it. And that's actually kind of what gave me the fever to kind of keep moving, is once I got exposed to one culture and how they did things differently, it really made me start to think about how different is that everywhere else. And across the board, there's a little bit different everywhere. But there's also what I think is like a blueprint of leadership that kind of just stands the ground no matter where you are. So taking all little bits and pieces that work great in different cultures and different styles, and remembering what worked really well where I came from, and then adding on those pieces where as I go along, and teaching people new ways and different ways of doing things. I won't necessarily say better, because there's always a reason for why each culture does the things they do, or the reasons behind it. But if you can improve upon something, I think that's always a plus.
Absolutely. Very cool. And you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but what got you into video games and then into the industry as a career?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I had a 2600 Atari, and I was playing Atlantis with my dad. And then we got the Nintendo, and we were playing Duck Hunt and Mario. And as I went along, I kept getting every other console. Plus, my dad owned a comic book store, so that didn't hurt. The fact that I grew up with comic books and nostalgia and cultural marks all across the board. I even worked in Hot Topic for a number of years, where I followed trends and all the stuff. And then it just kind of, being creative and really liking to work with people and really studying and understanding process. That's actually kind of what got me into it. So my original position was a game designer in the video game industry. But what I learned from game design and from working with people was, in production, is there's a better way to do everything. Or not, again, I caution to say better. There's a different way to do everything, and that you need to be very open to that and finding more efficient ways depending on who and what you're working with and what you're doing. So that's kind of what drove me. And then it just kept building upon it from there. Yeah.
Just quickly on video games and stuff, do you have a favorite video game?
Yeah, my old favorite was on the Super NES. It was called Ogre Battle, and it was for the time when you got the game, it had like this poster with all the different characters and how they could change into different characters, and it had like multiple endings, which was kind of unknown for at that time. And it was a strategy game. It was just super deep. Probably not deep as you compare it nowadays, but in my memory from back when I was a kid, that game was super deep and super cool. But I had to say my favorite game of all time is Peggle. It's like my meditation game. It's the game that I'll play, just put in if I just want to like zone out. And it's such a simple concept, but they did such a great job of building a very strong base system that you could just kind of build off of and go in so many different directions. And I really love the elegance of that, and that the fact that they didn't really have to get super crazy with the design and still make something that's very pleasurable and calming and fun and still like challenging. So
yeah, sure. How about a favorite console?
Favorite console, TurboGrafx 16. Even though like there were hardly any games for it or whatever, but the I think it was the sell and the marketing of that system made it so cool. And at the time, it had so many unique games that really weren't anywhere else. So they had like Bonk's Adventure and Slaughterhouse, and like games you're like, whoa, what is this? How is this on a console? And yeah, sadly, it didn't live as long as some of the other consoles out there. But that one was definitely and they had like these crazy little like small like credit card like game discs. So they were yeah. It's kind of cool. Yeah, it's kind of scary. You're always like, I'm going to break this thing or what? Anyway.
So you've worked in a number of different cultural settings and people from all different backgrounds. What have you had to face on a leadership front that's challenged you the most?
Yeah, so many different things. But it really is. It's like how people approach working time and working hours, breaks, what people consider to be done. But I almost believe that one's almost universal. And I always found it funny. Like I was actually talking with a coworker the other day about the definition of done when you're working on projects, and how some people will say, like, you ask them, is it done? And they're like, yeah, it's done. Except, I still got to add this thing and do this thing and do this thing. And they're like, well, wait, is that done? I'm like, what? How about Chris done? What's Chris done? Is like, it's done. Like, can we ship it? Is that done? And then, and that kind of varied from culture to culture. How people deal with confrontation or the avoiding it. I mean, some cultures are very, passive aggressive in how they do things, and other ones are extremely aggressive and very straightforward and just tell you exactly how it is. And I'll say from my side, originally coming from the United States, I actually really have enjoyed the cultures that just tell you when they don't like something. I mean, they don't repeat it. Like, they say it, you either come to an agreement that it's going to change or it's not, and then you move on. And it's like, it's already out of the way. You don't have to deal with it anymore. And then you have other cultures sometimes where it's very passive aggressive. And then they say things like, can I talk frankly with you? And I'm like, oh, please, thank God. I'm so glad you're finally going to say something like how you actually mean it, as opposed to hiding behind all these soft words. So it really can be a challenge, right? You really have to navigate the waters differently. And, I think you can get away a little bit with playing off your own personal culture and saying like, well, this is kind of how I do it. And then they're all like, oh, that's okay. Chris is an American. That you can get away with that. And you're just like, wait a minute, what's that supposed to mean? But it's kind of the fun, I guess, of the whole thing. But yeah, it's really tragic. And then I had one job where I had like 30 different nationalities, and that was like, but I think how you handle it is, this goes back to what I was saying about that like leadership blueprint. I think there's just fundamentally basic things that if you do as a leader, you will succeed, because it cuts through all the cultural pieces, right? Like when you're honest and open with people in conversations, people resonate with that regardless of their culture, or, when you take it upon yourself to better the situation, or when you lead by example, there's no question there that other people are going to resonate with that, regardless of, their personal or cultural beliefs. Like it really is, just what it takes to be a leader. You need to do these things. And I think you do these things and you will succeed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a couple of things I think really important in what you're just describing is like the universal language of being authentic and genuine.
100%.
And also being willing to be very flexible in your approach with different people. And I mean, we're talking about your experience with many different cultures. However, in the average leader's day-to-day life, they're dealing with people from all different backgrounds and walks of life. And so I think it's an important thing to remember that just because they maybe don't entirely look different from you, but they are probably very different from you depending on how they've been brought up and where they're from and what their experiences in life have been, and needing to be flexible as a leader.
Yeah, so true. And even when you switch from different companies, right? Every company, is in a different state in what it's doing, right? Some are new companies that are growing. Some are long established companies that need to pivot because of new markets and so forth. So when you're entering into those places, you really need to understand what the actual needs of that company are and not assume it's the same as the one you came from or what you're used to. So I agree with you that it's across the board, but it's the people that in general that you're working with, new cultures, new companies, everything. It's there's this phrase that Wayne Dyer talks about, which is attached to nothing and open to everything. And I think if you really have that approach on things, it really allows you to be more flexible, like you said, to just kind of do what's right for the moment, right? Or in the place that you're at, instead of coming in with assumptions, coming in with your preconceptions and baggage and everything. So yeah,
definitely. I think I like that quote, and I mean, one of my personal philosophies in life that I guess I developed, or I tried to develop very young. I don't know, maybe I didn't always, I would maybe always speak it, but I wouldn't maybe always be 100% true to it. But I have always tried very much to remember that everybody has something to teach. Doesn't matter who they are, where they're from, and it doesn't matter what the position they're in or kind of what's going on with them right there. But every single person has something to teach. And if you have the humility to approach people that way, I think it really speaks to that quote from Wayne Dyer, which I really like. So
yeah, no, I agree with you. I too actually hold very similar belief that everyone has something to teach you, right, in your life, right? Like everyone comes into your life for a reason. You are who you are because of all the people who've come into your life, right? Like there could be no regrets, because as long as you love the person who you are and where you're at in that moment, then everything that's happened to you before this has brought you to this point, right? So they're all teachable moments.
Yeah. And I do think that this is quite, I think it's quite the shift in modern leadership over the last probably couple of decades towards, real, genuine, authentic, meaningful leadership, and what does the whole team have to teach and contribute and everything like that, right? And I think that there's a huge shift this way, right?
Yeah.
And the leaders out there that are still stuck in the old arrogant mindset of leader knows best, I think is a huge opportunity there for individuals and for companies to shift that mindset.
Yeah, no, I get it. I got excited when I first heard it. Like I've always led this way and I've always taught this way, but servant leadership, when it became more and more of a catchphrase out there, that even though it's been around for years and years and years, but now it's way more popular even in corporate culture, right? It was mostly in volunteer work and stuff like that where you saw servant leadership, but now people are seeing the true benefits of servant leadership. And when I even talk about it, people are still like, "What's this?" And I'm like, "It's the future. Really, it should have been always, but it's definitely the now and the future." And I think you're going to get so many better results from asking, "How can I help you?" Like instead of "How can you do this thing for me?"
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I think this is such an interesting rabbit hole to go down, which, like I said before, if we diverge from my set of questions that I prepared, is fine. But this one of the things that gets me going sometimes is like the idea of all these generational differences, and there's value in those studies that have identified formative behaviors and various things that identify the boomers and the Xers and the Zs and whatever the box is that we're talking about at the time, and depending on whose study you look at and whatever else. But it's interesting that the younger, like Gen Xers and millennials and stuff like that, in that much younger age bracket, are encountering such friction in the workplace, because it is a lot of what they, these generational differences. And you talk about what forms a Gen Xer or a millennial, and so many of the values that describe that person are many of the things that old leadership doesn't work for anymore.
No,
right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's an interesting time.
And what's crazy is that it's those generations that taught the newer generations that be that way.
Right.
And then they question, why are they acting this way? And you're like, because you made them that way. Like it's why wouldn't they act that way? And honestly, I don't think there's any reason why they shouldn't feel the way that they feel. I mean, again, it's our environment's changed. The way we get information's changed. Technology changes at a rapid pace. Things are changing so quickly that we don't have the time to necessarily, or we always have the time, but we act like we don't have the time, but we're not in the same world as we were so many years ago, and it's rapidly evolving, and so therefore things do need to change. And we need to unlearn so much of the things that we've been taught in order to really get to the heart of who we really are. So I don't know. I think I look forward to the future. I don't tell them to get off my yard. I'm in the Gen Xer phase and of life, or era, whatever that ends up being there. But yeah, no, I think I can appreciate, again, but that's how I live, right? Open to learning new things and seeing how new things are. And I've kind of embraced it myself. I think there's a lot of folks that are still in my generation, definitely, the boomer generation, that work at companies for 10 years at a time, 20 years, all their lifers, right? And I tend to move from company to company every 3 years or so, maybe sometimes a little shorter, because it's more of like I get bored by there's no challenge there for me anymore. And I want to see what else is out there. And I think a lot of the millennials are like that too. Like they get bored, or they want to do something else. And I mean, there's so many opportunities now out there that like they can do that, right? I think there's finally a realization that you don't have to be miserable all your life doing the same job you've been doing over and over again, right? That if you put the time and the effort and you have the passion for it, right? You find what your purpose is, and it could be multiple things. It doesn't have to be one thing. You can chase that dream, and you can sustainably live your life. And again, it's all about just, figuring out what you need in your life to be happy. And for a lot of people, it's not much. And that's actually something I learned from traveling around the world, is going to different cultures and seeing, the different levels of what people consider to be wealth and poverty. And then seeing the people who you would be like, this is abject, this is total poverty. And yet these people are smiling and laughing and having the time of their life. And maybe it's a little bit of ignorance to what more they can have. But I might actually be happy to have that kind of ignorance to the world if I was happy all the time, right, with what I had. So it's all perspective. And I think maybe that's it. I think as much as people fight against globalization, I think the more we open up our eyes to all the things that are out there, we'll realize that, we can have happiness in many different shapes, forms, and sizes. And we shouldn't knock on what their goal and dream is versus someone else's. It doesn't have to fit into that tight little template that we've been told has to exist everywhere,
Totally. Shifting gears, I guess, a little bit back on here. What do you see the video game industry doing really well, and also not so well, that leaders everywhere could learn from?
Yeah, I think what they're doing really well right now is realizing they're not doing a lot of stuff really well, which is, inclusiveness, and getting more people involved across the board, whether it's different belief systems, different genders, different ways of life, however you want to construe it. I think there needs to be more inclusion. I think we have to have more people at the leadership level involved and giving their perspectives. We need to realize that it's entertainment that we're creating, and that there's more than one template of person. Again, that box we've been working in for so long of what people's expectations are, and realize that, it really is a rainbow of things out there that people want and need, and that there's value in all of them, and that we need to support them. and that even if it doesn't necessarily fit what you like or believe in, we need to support others who don't necessarily have a voice, and being able to get that voice out there so that those people can enjoy it, right? So that they can play a video game and see someone that represents them and makes them feel like a hero or, empowered. We need to start playing to more levels of that. And I think we need to listen more and be open again to different ideas that are there. It's happening. There's you read in the news, and especially and more in, I won't say the news, more in the social spheres that are out there, like Twitter or Facebook and so forth. But people are getting rallied on it, and people are listening, and those people who aren't in the place to make the change are getting removed from those spots so that the right people can be there. So, it's quite revolutionary, and hopefully it continues. My fear always is that there's only a little bit of momentum. People get excited. This is the other problem with attention spans though lately, right? So people get really excited about something and it carries on for a little bit, and then they get distracted and they start to follow the next thing and maybe not see it all the way through. So I just want to see the momentum carry all the way so that the wave doesn't just hit up, it actually crashes down and makes the change that we're looking for. So I'd really like to see that, in a greater level. But
as you've been accumulating all this knowledge and experience in the video game industry, how are you applying this as a leadership coach to this industry, and what are you helping your clients with?
Sure. The thing is, there's plenty of leadership programs out there, and I've studied and I've trained in them myself. And it's just really focusing on the things that are important to the video game industry's process and production and their values, and understanding that. So really what I'm bringing is my own personal experience and being able to show real life, analogies of how these leadership systems and methodologies and beliefs and so forth can be applied to video game production. And it's being able to answer the questions that when I was getting this kind of training, they didn't really have the answers for. They're like, oh, that's really interesting. I've never encountered that before. And it's not like everything is that different, because obviously once I was studying and everything, I was able to make the analogies and make the connections between the two. But it's a little bit easier always when you have some kind of reference that you can give, leaders, and be like, so when I was making this game, this happened and this situation occurred, and this is how I could apply, and then actually give the system of leadership or methodology and how it was applied specifically to that instance. And it just makes it a little bit easier and faster for them to grasp. So, yeah.
Well, and I do love those analogies and stories that teach lessons. I mean, that's one of the things I enjoy communicating in some of my material. Can you think of a video game that taught you something about leadership?
Video game that taught me about leadership. Oh, man. I pull a lot of interesting quotes sometimes from video games, like Lara Croft, or even Lara Croft has a good one, some good ones. Caught me off guard with that one.
It's a sneaky one.
Yeah, it's a sneaky one, but it's a good one because video games themselves are usually really good stories. The thing is, the issue tends to happen in video games is usually it's a solo hero that is backed by a few folks that support him and so forth, but they tend to do the hero's journey by themselves a little bit, right?
Right.
So it makes it a little bit tough to say they're fully there. But actually, games that do a really good job, I think, in teaching leadership, or I've actually encountered people that did really well in leadership positions in the video game industry, are games that have like guilds or group mechanics and so forth, where there needs to be someone who teaches or leads the team and makes sure that everyone's doing their job at a very high level while also participating in the activity. So like World of Warcraft and the guilds there, and when they're doing raids and they 20, 40 person raids, and that's a lot of people to be managing all in one instance and trying to get them to coordinate with each other. So I think they do teach some very interesting leadership skills there, and that's kind of fun. I think the downside to that a little bit is I think there's also a little bit of micromanaging there. So I think it also teaches a little bit of maybe not the best side of leadership skills, but you know what? I know everyone gives micromanaging a hard time, and I think if you're micromanaging all the time, that's horrible. But I do believe that there are instances where sometimes it is important when there's a crunch or whatever, and you have a lot of new people, and you're not sure whether or not they're going to deliver on time or whatever, to kind of give them that little extra, check in and so forth. So while I wouldn't recommend it as your everyday behavior or so forth. I think situational. You have to kind of understand what you're working with and what you're doing and apply all the different things in different scenarios.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's the flexible approach to leadership that we talked about earlier. I mean, micromanagement is unnecessary with people that know exactly what they're doing and understanding expectations and are going to deliver on that. And you have the trust and relationship with them to know that they're going to do that for you. So there's no point in micromanaging that person, but absolutely someone who's new and you don't know, and you don't, understand their level yet, may require more of that micromanagement. So 100%. Something I was thinking about is leaders in the video game industry, whether it's lead design or kind of whoever is responsible for getting the game put together and out into the community. They face a bad rap. Sometimes you're talking about social media and stuff like that. Like, there are some heavily invested gaming users, the user community, right? that get out there and they will roast these leaders and stuff, which I think is somewhat not exclusive to the video game industry by any stretch. I mean, I think people in entertainment, let's say, movie directors, producers, anyone producing entertainment, I would say can definitely be at this kind of leading edge of a very invested community, versus other industries. I mean, there's all kinds of great leaders out there, and it's not to say that they don't get their fair share of harassment or whatever, but I'm not as invested in General Electric. Jack Welch was a good leader and stuff, but like, I'm not like super invested in like, oh man, this light bulb sucks, but
unlike Mass Effect, and you have like an ending and all of a sudden everyone's like petitioning for them to redo the ending because like, you're like, what? Huh? Yeah.
Or like, the Sonic movie that was just out and people like destroyed that. And there was this whole like, oh my gosh, we have to remake this movie. Which I think is an interesting thing. Like, talk about this a little bit. What do you think is like? Is there a disconnect sometimes where the leadership on a project like that is disconnected from what the user wants? Like, because they're catering they're leading not only their teams, but in some ways they're leading the community.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, it's tough because there's a lot of different examples of that, and there's some instances where there is a total disconnect between the leadership and the fan base, and that's out there, right? Like the leadership doesn't actually, it's how well they know their product that they're working with, right? Like, I've worked with a lot of IP over the years, and I've taken a lot of pride in making sure that I knew the intellectual property I was working with inside and out before I was making a product. Like, I worked on the Dexter game back in the day on Showtime, and we worked really closely with the executive producers on that. And I worked for Disney, and I know their process of approval and so forth. And every company is a little different, and some people tend to use franchises in a good way, and you get people that are really happy about it. And then sometimes you get people who are just trying to make the money off of a franchise, right? It used to be a long time ago that video games that were franchise video games got a really bad rap, right? Like the ET game of all examples, which was awful on the Atari 2600 and is now filled in more landfills across the country than any other video game ever. The trend was basically, this was more of when retail games were more popular and so forth, is if you had a video game that was branded or an IP or something recognizable during Christmas time, those games would sell gangbusters, because when grandma and grandpa or your mom and dad went to go buy you a video game, they would buy the thing that they recognized, right? Like DuckTales, or that was actually a good game, but other like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or something that they recognize other than the game that they did not recognize, right? Like, there was, unless you asked for it, and even if you asked for it, there's a good chance they buy the game they recognized, like the Sesame Street Big Bird game,
Right.
rather than buy you Strider, which was far superior. But they didn't know that, right? And so, but those games weren't made also usually out of quality because they knew that they could just make whatever, put that name on it, and they would sell so many units, right? Thankfully, people like Rocksteady and stuff have made games like the Arkham series for Batman and everything that are amazing and awesome, and actually do a great job of taking take a great franchise and make it an awesome video game franchise. But you also have to realize that like fandom is a passion thing, right? People are very passionate about their and fandom is almost the equivalent of nationalism on some levels, right? And it's you can almost take it to the level of the I won't say fanaticism. It's fans, right? So it is fanaticism is the root word for it. But like even sports, right? People are very passionate about their sports. If there is a coach that's doing take another example of leadership, right? If there's a coach that's doing a really bad job, those fans will no ground, no mercy for these people. Like it is. Oh, yeah. And then the same thing goes for franchises and intellectual property that people have a lot of passion for. I mean, it's our job in the video game industry. Like we have, 8 hours a day, sometimes more, dependingly, and 40 hours a week. But people who live and breathe, and also remember that there might be a team of 100 making a video game, but there's thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of fans for some of these things. So these people have more equivalent time than the team that's making the game to put into thinking about this game, really, right? And so like this also goes into like when you're doing your designs, how it's almost pointless to make really complicated designs because in your 8 hours of the day, there's 50 of them trying to dissect what you're doing, and they're going to do it faster and more efficiently than you put it together, right? So it's like having like lots of little computers who all want to dissect what you're doing very quickly and find any flaw in it that they can find, and it's tough. It's super tough. And when you have social media out there, and people are hiding behind anonymity, and be able to be like being anonymous and just kind of be able to say whatever they want to about whatever with no repercussions. But the people on the other side are real people who have feelings and so forth. Yeah, it's tough. It's like you kind of wonder why people would ever want to put themselves out there, right? And then I give credit to the folks that do, and I also commend the people who take a step back and say, don't want to do it for a while, because sadly it's scared a lot of really great, super talented people out of the industry just because they didn't want to endure the slings and arrows of the fandom that's out there. How do we do better at it? I don't know. I think we all have to learn how to deal with social media. I don't think social media is going away, to be honest. And I think, I think this too. It's you're building a brand, right? I mean, nowadays every individual is a brand in and of themselves, whether or not they expand on it or not. So I don't think this is something going away. I think this is something we're going to need to maybe teach kids as they grow up and people on how to handle these things, because it's a dichotomy that you're not going to be able to escape. You're not going to be able to get away from it. I mean, you could be a hermit in the woods and cut yourself off. But I feel like, that's an option. That's always been an option. But I feel like,
right. Big Brother still knows where you are.
Yeah, exactly. There's no, there's no point. I don't want to even go into that, the chipping and everything. But it's just going to get worse. So I feel like we need to, again, keep enforcing the whole, don't be a jerk. I'll use the more polite way of saying it. Don't be a jerk to other people. Have compassion and so forth, and just really get out and then call out the people who are doing the wrong stuff, right? I think if anything this year and the last couple of years has shown is that there's a lower tolerance out there than we think. And the more we realize that we don't have to accept this bad behavior and stand up for what actually is right, is good, is great. These are the good things that are out there, right? But my worry is always, again, when that only lasts for a little while because we get distracted by the next thing that comes up that's there, and we don't realize that it's a constant fight and battle, and something that we need to be pursuing over and over and over again until we eliminate it as a whole, and not tolerate it, right? Intolerance for intolerance, I think, is the best way I can say that.
Yeah, definitely. Really interesting. Just heading into the tail end of our interview here, Chris. final couple of questions, and then we'll talk about where people can get in touch with you and connect with what you're doing. Um, what is one thing you know about life or leadership that you wish everyone knew?
That it is all about being, just kind of what I was fishing, all about being good to each other. It's like leadership, the best kind of leadership is and I said it earlier, I really believe it is service leadership. I think when you're empowering other people to be the best they can be, that you will see things that you never saw before. You will see greater products being produced, greater teams being built, better connections and teamwork going on between the individuals. You will build relationships that will last a lifetime. If you really, put the people first. I mean, there's good process, but people are really where the heart is at it. And so, take care of your people and, truly serve them as they deserve to be treated. Yeah.
When it's all said and done, what 3 words do you want to be used to describe your life?
Oh, it's that did he have passion question. Let's see. Happy and carefree. I think that's happy and carefree. That's I think the best way to say it. I think it's all about the art of happiness and what makes you happy or whatever, and not getting too boggled down with all the complications of life. So yeah, at the end of it, happy and carefree.
Cool. I like that. Nice and simple. And really, I mean, what are we looking for in life, right? So That's cool. So tell us a little bit about where listeners can check out what you're doing or connect with you on social media if they like.
Sure. You can definitely check me out on my website, www.pressstartleadership.com. Also, pretty much every social media location, Press Start Leadership, except for Twitter, which is Press Start Lead One. But yeah, and they're all connected to each other. So I find one, you find them all.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you're listening and you want to connect with Chris here, check out the detailed show notes at rashadoberlander.com, and I'll throw all the links in there so people can check it out. And to be honest, you would do yourself a disservice if you did not at least take a look at Chris's posts on social media. The branding is on point. If you like video games or quotes from movies or video games at all, definitely check it out. I love your branding, Chris. It's super fun and super entertaining. It really drew me into what you're doing. So I appreciate that. And thank you so much for being on the show with me today. It was a very interesting conversation. I know everyone's going to love it, and look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Excellent. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. This has been great. And yeah, definitely would love to speak some more. And I can tell there's a lot more conversation ahead. So
absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Have a good day.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
If you've enjoyed what you've heard today, would you head over to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribe, leave me a rating, leave me a review, and share this with a friend. It spreads the word and helps the podcast grow. You can also find me on social media at RE Oberlander. Until next time, stay awesome.